All right, everybody, we are back on Sunday, January 10th, and I usually start off with some jokes or oh well, Craig's here, so now we will have some entertainment for sure. But this week I wanted to just jump right in. Well, first of all, I wanted to welcome in a new face to our group tonight, Hedrick Nichols, who uh, I had a chance to meet over the summer. I would say uh, just reaching out to her and say, this year MASCD is going to be doing some work and doing some equity work. And for me, I'd love to have you co-host a few events. And we've become friends and been on a few events together. And when Dennis reached out to me this week about having a conversation about social justice, especially after this week, I definitely reached out to Hedrick because she has published a few books recently have come out, and is somebody who has an amazing lens and is an educator who's in the classroom. So thought would add to this. So before we jump right into it, Hedrick, I'd love for you to just introduce yourself. Craig is already clapping, so you know it's good. So just quick introduce yourself to the folks who haven't seen you or don't know you, and to our team for, although the last few people that came on you do have connections with, but just to let everyone know who you are.
Hedrick Nichols, author, educator in North Texas, and host of Small Bites, a YouTube series about equity in education. Also coming out as a podcast next week. Ed tech lead and curriculum writer for my district. So a few hats.
Awesome. And we also have one of our sponsors who we're going to bring over in a little bit. Paget is with us. So Gaggle is going to be giving away two of Hedrick's books this week. So one of the things, I'm going to put our Twitter handle in. I'm going to be looking this evening. If you could tweet out anything that resonates with you, use Mentor Round, and anything that resonates, something that thought that you have, feel free to send that out. You can tag me or anyone here as well. I'm actually going to change my Twitter handle, and that's how we're going to be looking, and I'll announce those tomorrow. So good news for this evening. I usually go right to Molly and put her on the hot seat, but I'm going to go to Dennis because earlier in the week, I won't say earlier in the week, probably Thursday, as we know, some really horrific things happened in our country, and we had to all go to work the next day and had to talk to students about it or go in and not know what to say. And Dennis reached out to me and said it this week, because we do try to keep it real when we say we are here to mentor our new educators. So experienced educators are going to have a tough time talking about how our new educators. So Dennis, I'm going to ask you not even a question of what brought you to send that to me right away about this is where we're going this week.
Um, Matt, when you think about it, we often act like our kids do not know what's happening in our society and our world. And LeBron James is speaking out about what happened. How many kids follow just LeBron James and himself? YouTube, the internet, our kids have access to so much information. Our kids hear us when we're at the dinner table. Our kids hear us when we're on the phone, but then we always pretend like they don't know what's really happening. And one of the things that I'm starting to realize is that when we're not honest and truthful about what's happening in the world and how we have marginalized people, we are depriving people of developing the skill of empathy. And without that skill, we continue to have this vicious cycle of where we see things, but nothing changes. Because a lot of people, when you look at some of the research, they talk about like the way people change. Some people analyze things. They think about it, they analyze, then they change. I happen to be one of those type of people. But most of the population, they have to see it, they have to feel it, and then they'll change. Well, what's starting to happen is like people are seeing things, but they're not feeling it. And I often tell people, don't let it be me. And then all of a sudden you get concerned. Like you see the injustices that are going on. And so many of our kids are going into different school systems, are talking to their friends. Who's educating them on exactly what's happening? Because as an educator, you're taught, give both sides to a story. Give both sides. You can't let your political feelings in. But yet every single school lives by a creed or some type of code of being respectful, being responsible, being safe even when no one is watching. And we teach kids these things, but yet when it's right on display for them in front of the television and in front of the entire world, we say nothing because we don't want parents to have backlash. We don't want the principal that might say, no, that wasn't a part of the curriculum. Even go back to like Colin Kaepernick. The very first time he started taking a knee, it was happening every single Sunday, and we would go to work and not talk about it. But our kids are talking about it. So what are you supposed to do? So I think it does. I think we have to understand what our platform really is and stop hiding behind the fact that we don't want to make someone upset when we see something wrong happening. And I know it's hard to stand up for what's right because it'll isolate you, it'll put you on an island. But if we don't do it, then who will? And when will this vicious cycle stop? Because of the things that we saw, and it was a little bittersweet for me because January 6th was my daughter's birthday and she turned 18. And at the same time as I'm trying to celebrate her, this is what I have to, this is the world she's entering.
Right.
And I can't protect her the way I used to. So,
No,
yeah, that's the
no,
start.
and no, and I appreciated that. And as soon as you wrote that out, we moved forward with it. And one of the things, and it wasn't part of what we do, but it was part of one of the MASCD, the last we had a kind of event where Hedrick came on and you had your son popped in, as he often does in some of our things, more that he's probably wants a snack or something, and you bring him on camera. And it really resonated that, he seems to be a high school student. Like these are students that we're talking about. So I'm going to kick it off with you, Hedrick, because you're in the classroom as well. But how would you advise new educators like Emily, Molly, Kanisha's new, but has been in the profession, other profession before here. What do you tell our new educators to start having this conversation? Because it's a difficult one.
Character is a part of education, period. Character is a part of every teacher's content. You know what I mean? One of the things, the first things you do generally before you talk about whatever math or PE or history, you talk about your classroom norms, and you norm around usually things that have to do with character. They have to do, just like you said, Dennis, we're talking about being respectful. We're talking about having civil discourse. In this room, how many posters and memes have we seen? In this room, we're kind. In this room, we respect one another. Well, how can all those things be on posters all over the wall and they not touch your everyday lessons? And so, even if you have one of those districts that says, absolutely, we're not talking about politics, I don't have to talk about politics. I talk about character. And I'm in the position where I teach digital citizenship. And one of the things, I will pull a tweet that, when Donald Trump says something not nice, I pull that. When Cardi B says something not nice, I pull that. When some teenage musician who's in, XXX says something not cool, I pull it. And I say, this is not a good example of how to comport yourself when people are looking, especially, and not even when people are not looking, because integrity is what you do when people are not looking. And so we always talk about those things. This is not politics. This is simply, I want you to know that it doesn't matter how popular they are, how many records they've sold, what position they hold in government. None of those things matter. That character is what it is. And if someone is modeling, I said to my kids, bad grown-ups, if you didn't watch the news yesterday, guys, grown-ups did some really bad things, and they modeled some really, really poor behaviors and some really bad ways to disagree. And that we can say every day because our kids do, they have disagreements. And so there is a way to attach what we see as, this is not good behavior. Look at this team lost, this team won, they shook hands at the end of the game. This is good behavior. So just take it and make sure that you are showing exactly what's on your poster, all of your class protocols, and use things that are in the news, or that whatever comes to you, to show your kids how to behave and how to be better citizens and better human beings.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for that. And I'm just going to throw it out to the group. How did you have those conversations? What are some strategies that you used, and maybe with heightened emotions, with sadness, with disgust, whatever that is? How did you have those conversations? I'd love to hear it and learn from each other.
So, of course, I had to have this conversation with my students. But believe it or not, it's not a new conversation. So what Hendrik and Dennis, touched on was just being a responsible educator. How do you respond to what students are dealing with on a daily basis? Last week, it was tough on us because not only, was there a riot on Capitol Hill, but 19 kids in Bed-Stuy, where I live, were arrested, 19 Black boys. And a lot of what they posted were their Facebook, DMs and posts. And it was difficult for me to understand, wow, you guys kept, a track of these 19 Black boys in their conversations on Facebook, but you didn't know that this riot was going to occur. And so when you have these conversations with students, I have to be honest with my kids, and I have to say, they're watching you more than they're watching this other person. And they're watching you more because you're Black. And so I am very transparent with my students. I'm not that cookie cutter teacher. I'm not the one that has the be kind signs on your classrooms. That I skipped that a long time ago. That was 11 years ago when I first became a teacher. I'm the teacher that's like, all right, y'all, so how do you feel? What's up? How you doing? And I had to really think about, well, Yuritsa, are you going to do something fun this week? Or are you going to basically say, how do you guys feel about not only the riot on Capitol Hill, but the fact that 5 of those 19 boys that were arrested were your classmates? And so it was another step up. And then I had to, take a step back and allow them to say, well, Ms. V, this is exactly what happened. And this is how I feel. And yes, we're targeted. And wow, 77 counts, Ms. V. And to have those conversations and engage in those conversations with my students and then ask parents, because I have to go that extra step to ask parents, well, how do you feel? And I know that most parents didn't understand exactly what occurred because some of the conversations that I was having, they was like, yeah, because they invaded the White House. And I was like, no, this is what happened. I need you to read this. And then this is what's taking place in Bed-Stuy. And this is the correlation with racism and discrimination and anti-racism, right? Because even when Dennis mentioned the fact that, some folks are not having these conversations and some folks are not discussing it or being real, you're being a racist. If you're not doing it, if you're not speaking about it, if you're not taking action, you're being a racist. And honestly, with this past summer, so many folks were reading Dr. Kendi's book. They were, quote unquote, doing the work. They were woke for those 3 months. Then September hit and it was like, all right, back to reality. I'm not going to talk about anti-racism anymore because guess what? I'm an anti-racist. I got my certificate. Right, and then this happened. And I was like, hold up, let me tweet because I already know what's going to happen. Now everybody's an anti-racist again. And then let me just, reaffirm the fact that, okay, Black History Month is next month, but it's supposed to be all year round. And I'm gonna need y'all not to tag me in some of y'all stuff for Black History Month. Because if we're not being realistic with the people that even follow us on social media, how do we intend to be realistic with the students that we face every day?
No, incredibly important. And that December event that Hendrik and I co-hosted, it was really talking about that. Like September hit, and yes, remote learning and equitable in school is critically important, but it started to become quiet around the social justice and the equity piece. And I'm going to throw it to Emily and Molly because we work in a state that is primarily white leaders, white educators, and the two of you probably have a majority of white students in your classroom. How was that conversation, or what did you hear when you went into school? And if it's something, the other thing I want, and I know besides the two of you, everyone else is going to just say what they think. I know you are first year educators in a district and you don't feel comfortable with something. I get that too. Like I want to be respectful of your position as well.
So my class has zero filter and has had zero filter since the
Perfect. You're perfect for that then.
So I kind of got a prequel to what was going to happen on Friday morning when we came into school after the election. So during the election, they would all talk and I knew exactly what their parents were thinking. And so come this week, I was like, I know they're going to bring it up and I'm not going to shut it down. Like, of course not. So sure enough, 9 a.m., kid raised his hand. He's like, did you know that people climbed the wall of the Capitol and that Trump can't go on Twitter anymore? I was like, yes, I
And they're
did
third
know
graders, correct? Third
that.
graders?
Third graders, 8-year-olds, yes. And so I was like, yeah, I do. And then we talked about, I said, who watched the news with their parents, whose parents told them what was going on, who maybe overheard a conversation. And I kind of asked them what they knew and then kind of explained it to them in a way that wasn't too much for third graders, but more so took the route of like, so these people were angry because Donald Trump is not going to be our president anymore. They knew that Joe Biden won the election because we talked about it when it happened. And I was like, and these people were upset and this is how they reacted. And then it kind of turned more into, so when we're upset about something, like what is a different way we can cope with our anger? How do we do this in a respectful way? And they're all like, they should have just screamed into their pillows. And I was like, yeah, they should have. So it went fairly well. I think I kind of kept it simple and younger content without being super transparent, but I knew it was going to come up. And so I had prepared for it the night before and was very much like, yes, everything that your parents told you, everything you're seeing in the news, all the facts that we knew. I was like, yeah, that happened. Like, you guys know that happened. I was like, in a long time from now, like people are going to talk about this day and you guys are going to say like, yes, I was in third grade and I remember when that happened.
Bravo.
Thank you.
I mean, teaching empathy, especially with younger students, teaching empathy is where it all begins. You know what I mean? Then it started off talking about how people see stuff, they react to stuff, but they're not feeling it. And that's what we have to do is teach empathy as, you know, to lay a foundation for being able to see what racism looks like, feels like, possibly could be like for someone else.
Yeah.
A little bit differently. My class is where I am is a very rural area, and it doesn't seem like there's much of a large discussion going on at home about all of this. And we came in for a morning meeting, and I was definitely a little bit nervous about how much they were going to know and what they were going to be discussing. And it was not a lot. So for this week in my PowerPoints, I have some read aloud books that will discuss some of those use your voices for the better and learning how to respect. And the first and only thing that we did was making a kindness and respect chart and like showing some of the actions that we can make when some of the actions that we can make when people aren't being respectful, and how we can show respect to others. And similarly to Molly, we made a chart about how do we act when we have different beliefs, and our students were talking a lot about how we can support one another. And even if you don't believe the same things that other people believe in, you can't act with violence, and you need to make sure that you're being appropriate. And so we did keep it rather third grade material, but I have a week plan, so hopefully it goes smoothly as well, with some equality and some using your voices, read loud stories that will resonate with them.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thanks for sharing, because I know this is, as we move forward, is a tricky topic to dive into and get into. So I'd love to hear from some of the other guests and panelists, some of the things that you talked about, some of the emotions you had to deal with in school, and how we can support those who are watching, who many people wrote to me today, they can't come tonight, but they're going to watch the replay. Strategies for them as they enter, because we have elementary to high school educators here.
I can share. I'm a little hoarse, so just excuse that. But I will say I didn't teach this week. Like, we start back next week. So I haven't had the conversation yet, but I will. And I teach 10th grade. So for me, in every class, I will say there are 1 or 2 students who are just very outspoken. They're gonna let you know how they feel. They're gonna come in the classroom with it, like, this is what it is, this is wrong, et cetera, and can be a bit overbearing with their opinions. And that's fine. I don't, I feel like sometimes we too often feel like we have to like reel it in and, control the atmosphere. But I think at least one thing I'm grateful for is that my students know that I'm not gonna do that unless it gets to a point of like disrespectful, of course. So that's one thing. If they wanna talk about it, then they will. However, many of my other students are uncomfortable with controversy. So instead of actually like, they don't want to talk about it because they don't want to offend their friends. So, like I said, I teach high school, so that's what I'm dealing with. And I'm still trying to figure out how to get them to see that just because a student is passionate doesn't mean that they want to fight, or that they're going to attack you, or that, it's going to come to blows or something. That it's okay to discuss it without it, going to that place. And I think that's a skill that a lot of adults obviously lack. So trying to just help them have those basic communication skills that are not so basic anymore, unfortunately, of just being respectful and being able to, hold your peace, even though someone is obviously on the other side of things. Because like I said, in my classes, my students, some of them are on the opposite spectrum of things. But we're working on it. And I think the more we have the conversations, the more things happen, the more that I'm able to help them, work through that. Because for example, with the election and everything, they did not, like that whole week, they did not want to discuss the election. And every day I'm like, you guys, how are you feeling about the election? Like, I'm ready for it. And they were just like, no, we don't want to talk about it, because they're seeing it so much, everywhere. So the last thing they want to do is come to class and have to learn about it. So that's something maybe you guys can assist me with.
Yeah, and Craig, Jason, and Sari, you are leaders in buildings. And so some of the things that maybe you were telling or supporting teachers to talk with kids about.
It's very interesting, Kenesha. I'm listening to everything that you're saying, and I'm thinking a lot about the differences that I'm seeing this year, specifically as the remote learning principal, and the virtual learners who are sitting in their homes, and the teachers who are navigating conversations, but now also have parents who jump in to the Zooms. And right out of the gate in the beginning of the year, the conversations like you were just referencing with the elections and the very strong opinions. And it was definitely a major difference than an in-person learning, and at least from my perspective, a very different conversation. It was much quieter with the remote learners as opposed to an in-person class. And I think that lends itself, in my humble opinion, to that safe space, and all of the children feeling comfortable to be able to have that open dialogue. Like, Emily and Molly, I'm listening to you talk about, your children with no filters and whatnot. And I do think it was a different experience for the remote learners this year.
And in our building, we do daily video announcements throughout the week. So on the day after those events took place, we recorded somewhat of a public service announcement, kind of to get the ball rolling in our classroom, since our teachers showed the announcements, where we just took what happened and then we compared it to our school creed. So it wasn't a case of us labeling, people, doing the wrong thing. It was just look at what we hold ourselves accountable to every day and think about the actions that took place. And then kind of like basically saying, if it's wrong for us to do these things in the school environment, what they did was wrong. Not that they are bad people, but what they did was wrong. Look at those actions. How do you carry yourself? How could they, have handled those things? And kind of just got the ball rolling to get the conversation started. We work in a very diverse school district and in our school. So we know that those conversations aren't, all the way one-sided. So just to have a message out there to get the ball rolling for teachers to engage those students in those conversations was our goal. And I think we took care of that this week.
I would add, I think about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I'm saying MLK like we friends, like, we go back like flapjacks. And, he says the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in the moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at a time of challenge and controversy. As a teacher first, my kids are looking at me for authenticity. They want to know, am I showing up in the same ways that I have before? They're curious about what am I thinking about? They're curious about, am I in line with how I've showed up? And being someone who's always been an agitator, as an educator and as a citizen, I
Mhm.
understand that something is wrong here. And I realize that our kids too are also reading and they're digesting a lot of what's happening socially. So when they look at, okay, there's a lot of people who happen to be white who are storming the Capitol, they also are looking at Black men and women who peaceably walked the Capitol and there were like hundreds of thousands of military people who faced them. Why was that not happening? So when we talk this week about those differences, our kids are keenly aware. If you have the Million Man March, I know because I have the pictures to show. I had to go through several layers of security to get into the Capitol and the White House. I showed pictures of like all of the varying levels of security I had to go through in order to go into these places. Like personal lived experience. This is not like my projection. This is what I lived. Like here, Craig Martin, principal, now executive director, going to the White House. I had 7 different checkpoints going into the Capitol, 7 different checkpoints. Going into the U.S. Department of Education, which is not as high level. I had 3 points of security that I had to walk through. And they're like, why is it that this was okay? And so we talk about like, well, what do you think is the difference? Because I want my kids to be critical thinkers, but they're not stupid. And I don't care if you're a second grader or a high schooler, they're keenly aware. And how you show up in this conversation is going to be monumental because it will drive the conversation moving forward. So I'm going to answer the question Kanisha asked because I think it's a really great question. One of the things I think about is mind, body, and spirit. I have to consistently think about how is my mind, body, and spirit actually showing up. And then I think about, well, what are the good things that I'm actually communicating out to the community about this situation? There's an awareness that there's a difference in how Black and whites have been treated in this experience. Then I think about how do we rise with resilience? Well, interestingly enough, there's a number of Black women like Stacey Adams who, some people will say saved America. It's arguable, but it's in a very interesting thing for young Black and brown young people to see a Black woman who was behind a movement around the vote. And then I think about how do you create brave care spaces, creating spaces to have these conversations because they're important. It is important to show up in particular ways and sometimes say, I'm uncomfortable with having a position because I really don't know how I feel. And kids will respect that because at least you're saying, hey, I have a lot of feelings and I really don't know how I'm supposed to show up right now. They will respect that more than you lying to them. And finally, how do you hold on to hope? And I think about this ultimately because, I too I still love Barack Obama. And he talked about, yes, we can. So despite the fact that it is very hard for me as a citizen, as a Black man in this America to actually see the images and know that this was okay to someone. I also have to think that on the other side of this, I'm hopeful because Kamala Harris is going to be vice president, right? I think about Stacey Adams, who did like work for 10 years so that we have people voting in record numbers. And I think about the countless, examples of people who stood and were steadfast in their belief that there was something greater and better beyond the moment they were in. And so I think about that and I want to keep reminding us our kids are watching. And so I'm just going to continue to kind of say, stay steadfast in that because that's the things that I know my kids and, youth and also educators are thinking about.
Greg, I have a quick question because, well, actually anybody can take it, but I would love to hear a Black male perspective on this because what you said, like our kids, I got kids kind of like, like Kanisha's kids. And when my 7th graders come in and say, well, they don't care about us anyway, because I tell you right now, that's why we need Black Lives Matter, because if we had been on the Capitol, it would have been like nothing but body bags. What do you say? You said you talk about talking about resilience. You talk about saying, this is because we're in classes. I know if you teach anywhere above 6th grade, you are likely to hear that one period during the day, somebody's going to come out with it. So what do you say to us? And what do you say especially to white teachers who have not maybe heard that sentiment before, or who don't expect it to come from someone as young as it's coming from?
Oh, I know someone's got something to say. Jump in.
Not all at once, y'all.
Dennis doesn't have his mute unmuted, so he about to give us a whole sermon. Let me get ready. Let me sit and get
Everybody sit back. Here we go.
One of the things that I think you have to do, you have to be honest, and you have to say, like, unfortunately, in our world, it doesn't make it right, but that is a possible reality. Because sometimes when we don't say that, we position people and we put kids into positions where they do end up being harmed. And I don't want my kid to be on the news saying they attended an event and they ended up dead. That's a very harsh reality that we live in today. And LeBron James said it. Pretty much anybody that spoke, even Joe Biden himself said it. If the protesters, which they claimed they were, which I'm not going to give them the right to call them protesters, but if those individuals would have been Black, if it would have been me, I'm not here right now. And Matt, this is one of the reasons why I asked us to have this conversation, because it's not just for the kids, it's for the adults too. How do you have this conversation with adults when you don't know? How do you even understand what it feels like to be me when I'm sitting here telling you, like, if that was me, I can't. It blows my mind that we have such a duality in our world, that just the mere color of your skin dictates whether you live or not. And people started to go back and like place like all different types of events. Like you'll see memes like Colin Kaepernick. He took a knee. We had a big problem with that, but people are literally defending President Trump's tweet should not have been kicked off of Twitter. Like people are defending this, upset about this. But why?
70 million votes, correct, Dennis? 70, crazy.
But think about how like we don't have really shared values in our world. And that's one of the really big problems that we have. We talk about morality a lot, but morality is nothing more than the values that we all hold individually. And it always shows its face when we start talking about race. Because if you tell me my life matters just as much as anybody else's matters, if you tell me if I broke the law, somebody else breaks the law, and we should be treated the same, and it's not. And we have this tendency to ignore things that happen, but whenever we ignore something, we validate it. And then that is the behavior that we choose to continue to let prosper in our society, no matter who it marginalizes, no matter who it hurts, no matter which type of family it destroys. And at some point in time, it has to stop. And I just hope that we're getting to a point, like Eureka said, we're not just doing the work because it's in the season. Like my fear is in a couple of weeks, this goes away. And it's like it never happened.
It's not going away, Dennis. I'm sorry. And here's where I'm gonna push you. George Floyd was murdered. Point blank, period, in my opinion. Millions of people marched across the world. It wasn't just the United States. It wasn't just Charlotte. It wasn't just LA. It wasn't just Atlanta. Across the world on the same day, there was a march. For me, there is hope because millions of people who don't even speak our language said something is wrong with this. And when you look at what happened on January 6th, if you look at Twitter alone, world leaders condemned the behavior of these people and said, this is not the democracy. This is not the America that we purport and believe and know to be true. And we may not have a commonality necessarily in how we run government, but we know humanity. And so I think that the world is recognizing the difference. And so the question is, how do we raise that consciousness among our young people? Yes, there is clearly a duality that is going on where two situations, people in the same space are a year late, a year difference, have made themselves, they made their word, their preference, their presence at the Capitol, and they were treated differently. That is hard to deal with. And I'm not going to sit here and lie. I'm having a hard time as an adult reconciling that. But our kids, if we show them the complexity of this year, they will know that the world who is looking at us also feel the tension and the humanity and empathy that is necessary for us to navigate this. They too recognize that something is wrong, and it's how we as a nation show up. So it's going to be more about how we as a nation show up, and look at how we voted. Look at how we voted. Georgia alone should be something that says, baby, something different is going on, because it was a place that was red all day and had Southern conservative values. And it's absolutely, well, it's a shade different. It ain't completely, but it's a shade different. So for me, I just think there is hope. We're growing, we're moving, we're not where we need to be. And there's a lot of conversations and a lot of work to be done. But I still believe there's hope, because there are people who don't even live in our zip code who believe that there's something better and bigger for us as a people.
So I want to jump in real quick because Melissa wrote something in the chat, and I want to make sure we talk about that. And then I want to bring Paget over, and then I have a final question for everybody, just to respect time, because we could be here for 2 hours. Is so important, but I want to respect your time. So Melissa, you wrote you were the only one to talk about it in your school. Can you share what that, both sides, one is the sharer, and two, the feeling around you? And again, you don't have to talk about it if it's uncomfortable, but I'd like to hear
No,
that.
I was trying to see where I could jump in, but it was hard to jump in. So I just
That's why I was like, I'm just saying her name. She usually takes her head at me, but I'm doing it.
Well, I teach second, so we're fully online. So the parents are right there. So I think that is the problem with a lot of educators, but I do what I want, ask for forgiveness later. I was ready for any emails, have been doing this for 20 some years now, ain't gonna stop. So basically I could have ignored it. The kids didn't bring it up at all. But for every small group Zoom, because I did it in small groups purposefully, so my kids could have more of a forum to speak up and voice their opinion. So I brought it up. I said, did you see what happened on the news yesterday? Did your parents talk about? And you could see them glance up to look at mom and dad and then glance down. And some of them said no. And I said, well, let me show you. And I just put up pictures. I was like, tell me what you noticed.
Good for you.
What do you wonder? It was a great conversation. Some of them had no idea. And I made the comparison of, let's say this was our school. You know, you can't just go in. You have to hit a button. Everything's locked. What if these people stormed into our school? You know, completely trashed it, hanging from the walls. There's people in there that are working and you're supposed to be in there safe. And that hit home. And then there was a lot of questions. There was a lot of opinions, and there was a lot of character that was talked about. Why were they doing this? They couldn't understand why they couldn't just talk to someone, why they were having like forcefully doing this. It was a really good conversation, and it needed to happen, even though none of them would have brought it up. None of them even hardly knew what was going on. But I wouldn't have changed anything that I did. I was very mindful and purposeful, though. I didn't bring race into the equation just because some of them, I mean, you could tell my one little girl who's African American looked at me and said a couple of things. And I said, yeah, baby, I know. But I wanted to be mindful of them and the parents, because I think the parents should have the authority to talk to their kids. I didn't want to jump the gun, but I do think it's something that they should know. And I told them, you are going to grow up, you are going to have kids, your kids are going to ask you about this. You need to know what happened. This is what happened. And you're going to say, I remember when this happened because Mrs. Hayes was my second grade teacher and she brought it up and blah, blah, blah. So I just think from Dennis's question, I think it needs to people need to start talking about it. I am no expert. I have white privilege. I own it. But I also think that we can't hate people that are actually trying, that are trying to speak up, that are trying to do the right thing. I don't know. That's what I did.
Well, thank you. That's, thank you for sharing and just being that voice and trying and putting it out there. So one of the things I'm going to chat with Paget for a minute, I'm going to throw a question to everyone to give you a minute to think. And then I want, as our kind of wrap up, everybody to have one last kind of thought. And I'm going to have two different questions. One, because Melissa was talking about that change. Craig talks about it all the time. And I read it a few times in the chat, that if we're focused on our students and shifting districts and keeping this conversation going, let me be the representative of all those district leaders. So the first question is, if you were to say something to a district leader, what can I do to shift, not just my district, because I'm just one district, but through MASCD in Massachusetts, or what would you like to say to a district leader, superintendent, assistant superintendent, to start making that shift within a district? If you're, a classroom teacher on the panel and want to give one suggestion to how to support teachers to talk to students, that's a significant end as well. But I'd like to cover those two, and I know Dennis and Craig, they're going to come at me, which is great, of what we can do as district leaders, and anybody else too. I want to be that representative, but I'll give you a minute to think. And Hedrick, I'm actually going to start with you. I want that question to you first. What do you want to tell a district leader that we can do to shift? But I brought Paget on here as one of our name sponsor. Gaggle has been amazing. And the reason I did that is because the other thing, and again, we could talk about this for days, a big piece of this was the incitement of a crowd. The big piece of this was somebody saying, let's march down, to the Capitol. And one of the things that really thought today, and I really just emailed her to say, hey, you want to jump on? Because if our students are doing this within our schools, they're usually doing it through Google Drive or something, and we don't know about it. So the piece I wanted to bring Paget on is that's something that Gaggle does. And just a 1 minute, Paget, talk a little bit about what Gaggle does for students to keep them safe, because that's really what we're talking about. Not only educating our students, keeping them safe, and how to connect with you if it's something they're interested in.
Sure. Thank you so much for including me, Matt, in this incredibly important conversation tonight. So think of Gaggle as like a digital safety net. What we're doing is we're looking at what kids are talking about in their digital environments. And we're looking for signs of kids in crisis. So that could be anything from thoughts of suicide and depression to thinking about violence towards others, pornography, drugs and alcohol. We're looking for all those different things. And when we see something that's concerning, we immediately reach out to the district, our partners, and they then can get those students the help they need. So the key there is that it's not like we're looking to try to help these kids, right? So, over the last 6 months, since school has been remote and kids have been struggling with all of that, we've seen an 83% increase in incidences with regards to suicide and self-harm. And we've seen a 63% increase in discussion about violence towards others. So these kids were already having a lot of trouble given the circumstances. And then we had all this past week. So Gaggle, just think of us as a partner in helping keep your kids safe.
Awesome. And this week when I send out the updates, I'll make sure to include everything, because that's a big piece of what we do is keeping them safe and educating them. So Paget, thanks for stopping, and thanks for everything you do for us. And tonight we're going to be giving away 2 of Hedrick's books, thanks to Gaggle's donations, and look forward to that. So thank you so much. All right, so Hedrick and the rest of the crew, if you're going to tell us district leaders how to make sure this conversation continues, give me a suggestion. How do we do that? And how can I support that to other leaders who are not here tonight? Unmute. Hedrick, you're muted.
Still the same favorite quote. I was looking back at what Keisha said about having a hard time with people who were kids in the classroom who were actually talking about how they were in support of the violence that was perpetuated on January 6th. And I think that it's a hard thing. What I'm going to say is hard because there are also many teachers who may feel that way as well. So it's difficult, but I think it's important that most of what you said to your one little Black student, you said, yeah, I know, baby. And I think that's so important that we often, when I say we, I think I probably mean more white teachers who may be in support of what happened, or may at least support the mechanisms and people who did that. It's hard, but you have to realize that even though you have a reality that you are firmly believing in, that for people of color, that reality is very different. And to gaslight them, to dishonor that as being very real is wrong. Even if you can say, I am so sorry that you feel that way, that we live in a country where you feel like that. That doesn't say you believe it, but at least it lets you validate your kids' experience. So I would say basically to get to a place where you realize that there are different realities for the students in your class. You know, whichever populations you serve, you don't have, oh, they're just all 10th graders across the country. No, 10th graders across the country live out very different realities depending on a myriad of things. So I would say to district leaders, be more responsive to your kids. And whether you have kids that are very much kind of like Emily and Molly were saying, very much white kids, and this doesn't touch them, that all the better, all the more you should make sure that they know that everybody's reality is not theirs. You guys are super lucky, you know, this will happen for you, but did you know that that might be different for other kids? And that's something we need to start really realizing, that everyone's lived experience in America is not the same.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And I'm awesome. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to throw it out to anyone else at this point. Jump in for your last thought for people.
I can share. I think for me, it's just like having a space for teachers to talk. I don't have that at my school. Our principal, like, we don't have faculty meetings like in person or virtually. Like, he'll just send like a video for everybody to watch. So I don't have meetings with anyone. Like, even department wise, we may meet like once every week or so. But as far as, all right, a strategy or a game plan of, we need to talk about these things, here's a framework, here's some guidelines, there's nothing. So then when you go to do it, which is what I did, had a Black Lives Matter discussion with my students, I end up in the office in trouble because a student said something to another student. But why is that? You never gave us no PD about it, but we want to talk about strategies and all these other things. But I mean, come on. And I feel like even in this virtual world, you can't shy away from the fact that teachers need help and they need to talk as well. We have to process this as teachers, as Black educators. We have to process what we're dealing with, and then be able to sit there and have to also be responsible for how we're going to talk about it with our students. It's unfair sometimes what we're required to do and what we're expected to do when you don't. I may be going on a little bit of a tangent here because I'm frustrated. You don't care about our health. You don't care about our protection. You don't care about anything as long as we show up to do the job. And now you expect for me to not talk about it. Not going to happen. But then when I do talk about it, it's a problem. So I think, honestly, the higher up you go, the more you should be prepared to discuss these things with those who are in position underneath you. Otherwise, don't be upset when I, as a Black educator, make sure that my students have a space to talk about it. Then teachers should have a space to talk about it as well.
I'm gonna jump right in.
That was fabulous. Thank you. And then jump in. I could feel you just coming at me as the representative of all of those district leaders. Yeah, I was waiting for you to just get up into the camera at me. That was awesome. So go ahead, jump in.
Kanisha, everything that you're saying was resonating with me so very much. As a district leader, it's amazing. the feelings that you have, I was feeling the exact same feelings, and I am still feeling them. I am so grateful for the screen in front of me right now, and I'm so grateful for this conversation. I'm making mistakes, I'm stumbling, I'm pushing through, and I'm learning, and I'm growing, and I'm supporting the staff members as they're having the conversations. And then I take a step back and I'm thinking, did I do that the right way? Am I supporting them the right way? The same way that Kenesha, you were just saying, like, you're not being trained to do that. I'm trying to be trained to be able to do that effectively and appropriately. And it stirs up so many emotions, where one of our attendees tonight, Tara, so grateful for her, because let me tell you, Thursday, my drive home from work, unpacking everything with her and just trying to, figure out the best way possible to just show up. So Kenesha, thank you. That was really, I just felt that.
Hey, Kenesha, I'm gonna jump in real quick. I'm gonna keep it quick, love. I'm gonna keep it quick because I know you're gonna close out. You like a showstopper.
He's been trying twice.
But I know. I'm gonna say this. Kenesha, look at who's in the room. Hedrick holds like podcast author, she is doing the thing. Yuritsa disrupts all day. I don't sleep on her ever. She's about to launch a three-part series, right? On around race equity. She ain't playing. You're in the room with greatness. So if you're already an abolitionist, because you're like, I ain't waiting for nobody, I apologize later. I'm like, I'm sorry. I've always apologized. Like, if you came in and you found out, I'm like, yes, I'm leading all the little young people to freedom, because we ain't got time. Our kids know we ain't got time for this foolishness, and they know better than I'm like, well, you come in, you get mad, get upset. But these young people deserve a livelihood and a truth that you yourself ain't ready to pay. So I'm like, go on. We gonna do what we do. And so I'm just saying, for those who are on this call or will hear this recording, you already have resources in the house. If you're really serious, then check in, because Hedrick has already written a book too, I'm sorry. And and it's dope. And Yuritsa blow up all day with flipgrid.com. And there's others. I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna close out, because this Hedrick's partner in crime, Kalisa Wing, who just holds it down. And she says, in 2021, I hope we remember that if we fail to plan, we can plan to fail. Let's keep working, keep loving, keep leading, keep fighting, keep dismantling, and keep breaking down systems of oppression so that everything can change. And that's one of the greatest gifts we can give our kids ever.
Follow that, Jason.
Well, first I want to jump in with Kenesha real quick. I just want to say our doors are open. If you want to relocate, we got you. We can streamline the interview process and all that. And this is coming from our top recruiter, myself. So hey, come on. You won't be in the office, you won't be in trouble. We welcome that train of thought. So and hey, my word is bond. My supervisor is right in that bottom corner down there, Dennis. Come on. But what I do want to say is, in terms of speaking of districts, the media does a great job of painting the two separate types of America that exist. And so I think a way to combat that, especially at the younger ages, is to kind of balance that playing field and kind of give our students of color more of a why, because they can see all the obstacles that are against them every day when they turn on the TV, get on the internet, but they only get 1 month out of the year to celebrate, their heritage, whether it's Black History Month, whether they're Latino, they get these little pockets of time, whereas we have to strive to push this and make it a norm, a regular, a standard, so they can see all these things against them, but see all the other things that they can strive to do. And we have to make this more of a normal thing and not to just be trendy, because it's kind of like the retailers. Oh, February is coming up, let's throw our Black History t-shirts out there. But this knowledge shouldn't be trendy. It should be something that's going on a regular basis to empower our students on an ongoing basis. And Kenesha, come on, just come on, we got you.
So the advice that I would give to district leaders is just stop showing us sympathy. I'm grateful that I have some strong Black men and women in my corner who are district leaders, who are representatives of the Board of Regents, who are superintendents. And when I call them and I say, oh my God, did you see the news? Look what happened. They're like, all right, Yuritsa, so what are you gonna do? And a few months ago, even with the murder of George Floyd, it was like, all right, you talking, but what are you going to do? It wasn't like, oh, let me pat your back, you know, yes, we're all Black, so okay, let's just show some sympathy. It was more of, let's come together, let's create a blueprint, which we did call the Blueprint Group, and then let's create a curriculum for change. And now we're in that second phase where we're presenting to New York State next month for a whole African American history curriculum with a $3.5 billion budget that's basically saying we also need museums. We need to change that scope of, let's just change the books in our class and the libraries. Let's now, you know, have museums that reflect who we are as a people. Let's go back to Ghana and Africa and, you know, those movements who have made us who we are, because honestly, the more we keep trying to sympathize with Black people, you have us looking at you like you're crazy. Like, I'm tired of white people trying to sympathize with me, because at the end of the day, you will never truly understand what a person of color is going through because you're not really walking in their shoes. And so what I will also say is, stop trying to write our story. You know, I realize that a lot of people, and I could talk about social media because, like Craig said, I'm always on there trying to, you know, start some stuff. But, you know, you have some people who might have read like a quote or a tweet and then they retweet it. And then, you know, it's like they're saying it, but we know that's not your words. It's not your story. You didn't live it. You know, people don't hold their purse tight when you get in that elevator with them. People don't roll up their windows and just give a little space when they have to ask you a question or which way of the street to go. And so for me, it's, let us tell our story, because at the end of the day, that's what our kids want to hear. They want to hear that realistic story, not what's been painted, not what you might have seen on CNN or on Fox. Allow us to educate our students how they should be educated, which is knowing who they are. So for me, it's more of, stop showing me sympathy. I don't need your sympathy.
I want to say that one of the things that I would ask district leaders is to first and foremost take a look at themselves in the mirror. When we talk about leadership, ask yourself, how are you leading through this? And if you are on the outside looking in, would you follow your leadership in this time? And if you have any other answer but yes, then something should change, because then the privilege of being a leader, you're not doing your absolute best with that. But then I would push it even further and say, you know, if you turn on the TV, one of those individuals that were at the Capitol, they too used to be somebody's students in the school system. What did they do back then that allowed this to perpetuate in our society today? Would you really want to turn on the news and see some of your former students there? Because ultimately, that's still a reflection of you and your leadership and the school district you led. And Hedrick, you asked like the question, like, do we talk to, what would we say to our students that, especially our young African-American men that will say things like, if it would have been me, they would have killed me. I would have been shot. I would be going to jail, because we didn't see that side on the news. We just saw people breaking into the building. We didn't see anybody get arrested. We didn't see any of that. But then I will also ask the school leader this: how would you feel if this young man has to carry the weight of that feeling his entire life, or her entire life? Because at this moment, you have the ability to help change the narrative of what's happening within your district through your leadership alone. And that is going to create a level of discomfort, that is going to create a level of conflict. But if these events cease, isn't it worth it? And I'll leave it at that.
Awesome.
I'll go.
All right.
I would ask for the district leaders to give us a little confidence in our decision making instead of doubt and questioning. And when parents call, they can say, I support my teacher. I know they're doing this for the right reasons. We are doing this for our kids. That's what I would like for our district leaders to do.
Awesome.
One thing that I keep thinking about is that the night that it happened, I was like searching on Instagram, searching on Twitter, searching on TikTok for other teachers I follow, seeing how they were going to react, how they were going to tell their students about it in the morning, what strategies they were going to use, what sources they were going to use. And I didn't get an email from my school until about 8:45 a.m., which is 15 minutes before school starts, saying, oh, we know that this happened, so awful. Here's like an article you can read. So I feel like a district leader, I mean, I've only been teaching for like 5 months, so I don't know nearly as much as anyone else here, but to acknowledge it as soon as it's happening, when there's a difficult conversation that needs to be had the next day or the next week, for them to reach out and say, we know this is happening, we're not going to pretend it's not happening, even if they're saying we're working on a list of resources to get to you by the end of the night, or to make sure that they actually are working on that list of resources and providing their teachers with PD not only when the difficult things happen, but throughout the year or before school starts. I think I only attended like 1 or 2 diversity professional developments. And I feel like there should be a specific PD based on when something tragic happens or when there's a huge instance of racism and how we address it at a predominantly white school.
Yeah, I would have to agree with Molly. So that night we were sitting together and I actually did get an email from my principal, a really nice lengthy one, and the two of us sat together and read it. And it was kind of just my principal unloading how she was feeling, and it was in the moment, heat of the moment. So, which was wonderful to see because it gave me a little bit of confidence and kind of like permission to speak about it in my school, because I wasn't really sure, not that I need the permission, but as a first year teacher, it's nerve-wracking, like not really knowing how to go into the situation and what my principal's standpoint is on it and how I should be bringing it up. So we got the permission and like the grant, I suppose, that she would support us, but then there weren't the resources to go along with it. So I think that resources and pushing us to include various things and PDs about it all year long, not just one email, would be really wonderful. So hopefully something more comes out this week.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. I think everyone had the last say. And one of the things that I will say to close, and then I'm actually going to have Hedrick close, because one of the things that I've learned along the way, and Yuritsa said it, or alluded to it, or passionately said, don't just show up when an incident happens. Don't just show up in February. And just because I'm Black, don't come to me when there's an issue. And then see, what would you say? It's for all the leaders out there, and I'm a 49-year-old white male leader, that, and in Massachusetts, I am in the majority by far in what we look like here, is that you don't have to have all the answers, but you have to ask the questions, and then you have to keep coming back. And I know when we talk about this, when we do some of the other things, when Basil comes on, and I called him first day, like, what can I do? And I often go back and talk to Dennis and Craig and Hedrick and say, I don't have the answers, but I'm going to keep trying. So I don't have a ton of suggestions, and that's why I'm going to end it with Hedrick, because I want to hear what she has to say to learn. But my suggestion and my plea to our district leaders and our school leaders is keep asking and keep coming back. And if we can do that as a leadership group, it trickles down from what everybody just said. And if you are having difficulties, because I know, I'll just say in Massachusetts, it's a hard conversation sometimes to have in some districts. Shoot me an email, drmatthewxjoseph@gmail.com, and I'll have that conversation with you and your superintendent or whoever, because I'm in a position now to just keep moving forward. So I'm putting that out there too, to any leaders who want to talk about it, talk about the journey we've been on here in MASCD or my own, and you're not alone. And like Melissa said, it's about having that conversation. So I'm going to have Hendrik close it out. We did go a little long tonight, but it was some topics and many people had things to say, so I didn't want to shut that down. But I am going to close with Hendrik and thank all of you for this conversation. You're on mute.
Matt, yep, I got it. I will say, for the first thing, we just can't keep pretending that these incidents, we run from news cycle to news cycle to news cycle. News cycle, outrage. Oh my God, I gotta do something. Let me go get one. Okay, no, everything's cool. All right, let me go ahead and do my better. Oh my God, something else happened. this is who we are. I just did a beta test of my podcast for next week, and that's what I talked about. We live in some place in our heads that, but America is kind and good and benevolent, and that's kind of never been the case. I love my favorite leather jacket is 30 years old. I bought it with one of my first major paychecks. It's got holes in it. It's worn. This part is like literally almost falling apart. I love, that's the favorite. If everything tried to burn down, I would take the coffee machine and that leather jacket and tell my son to jump out of the window. So we can love stuff that's not perfect. We can love our country as we recognize that it is flawed and deeply flawed. But if we get to the place where we see these things as kind of just a continuum of things that have been happening since the foundation of our country, we'll get out of the habit of thinking that we have to react. Why are we reacting? That proactive means that we've already seen this. We know it's coming because it keeps happening. So once it's like you put a diaper on a baby because you know it's gonna be. So why are we still pretending like this is, oh my God, something else has happened? Be prepared, because the systems in our country mean that everyone isn't handled the same way. We have different experiences. So if you're a leader, then I would say, in today's world, you got Twitter, then you have access to all kinds of people in training. If you live in the most rural area, the most homogenous area that has nothing to do with diversity, doesn't, I don't know what equity, fine. If you have that one little kid that you need to support, then do that. Follow MASCD. It's a great place to start. There are leaders there. There are PDs that they offer. There are webinars that they offer. There's really no reason to be able to still be saying, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do, because there are people that have these conversations once, twice, 3 times a week. Grit Crew EDU on Saturday mornings. That's really what their focus is. I think they start at 10 a.m. in my time zone. So I guess 11 a.m. for EST. And that's all they talk about, is how to have those kind of conversations. So like I said, good place to start is to follow MASCD, because they really do that. Yuritsa has an Ask Yuritsa on YouTube. I have Small Bites on YouTube. Those are places where you can go and get information, and where you can still, nobody's so big and blown up that you can't say, let me send this person a DM. Let me send this person an email. Wow, I really know I'm not supposed to be your one Black friend. I do not speak for all Black people or all minority people or all female people, none of that. But I can at least give you some resources and point you, I think that we're all here to help each other. So nobody's going to be mad if you reach out to them. So if you are still in a place where you are, I just don't know what to do, then you are just you're living in a fantasy world, and you're not supposed to be in school, working in school. If you're working in a school, you have to be able to serve our country and all of our students. And your students are going to be the next generation coming up to lead us. And the way you can prepare them for that is to make sure that you know how to have these conversations. So, like I said, start with MASCD. Matt will tell you where to go.
Awesome. So, see, I knew having Hedrick closes was the right decision. So I want to thank all of you for coming. I want to thank Dave Soha, who's a teacher in our district, who connected with me yesterday and wanted to have these conversations and be a part of that. And those are the teachers that resonate and make that shift as well. And thank all of you for having the conversation tonight, having the courage and bravery to talk about some of this that in some districts, they just don't talk about it. And we have to keep talking about it and sharing it. And tomorrow's Monday, and go in, love up your kids, smile, and be the best for them, because everybody that walks through the door, that's our job and that's our role. So have a great week, everybody. Thank you all for coming tonight, and we'll see you next week.